Well, hello and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn show with me, Andrew Eborn, my very special guest, Vicky Pryce. Welcome back, Vicky.
Thank you.
We've been unpacking what might happen in the budget tomorrow. We've been looking at the impact on the UK and some potential things that will happen. What's happening at the moment? I presume everything's written and nothing will be changed now, will it?
Well, who knows? I think there can be changes up to the last minute, and but generally, things have to be printed. It's faster perhaps than it was done before, so you didn't need to. You needed certainly to have a little bit more time before to get to the final thing, because simply because of the way that the systems worked. Now we are much more efficient, of course. But what I do know, and I do remember, is that there's so much that now has been tried, and focus groups or the media or Labour backbenchers have not liked, or there've been attacks from the other parties. There's been so much that has changed. So probably is still a complicated issue to put all these little bits together. Because if you had just gone and done one big thing, like the income tax increase, which was then dropped, well, we'll see. Who knows? Maybe there'll be something in the budget tomorrow. That would have been simple, but loads and loads of small measures then need to be also explained, because I think, as you were suggesting in the earlier part of our conversation, is the balancing. Do you get it right? Do you get also the message right? Do you get the communication right so that people do the right thing that you want them to? Otherwise, you might just lose all the chance of getting that money. What's going to happen to the housing market? What forecasts are there if there is a mansion tax of sorts? Are people already, it has affected the market just before because of those expectations. How big will that be? There were suggestions that you start paying a different council tax rate for houses over 1.5 million. Now we hear it will be over 2 million. Over 2 million, how many houses does that mean in London? We discussed before the balance between London and the rest. Well, most of the expensive houses are in London and the southeast, and they will be caught. So there were suggestions today in one of the papers, I think it was City AM, that was quoting that the figure of homes would be something like 600,000 that would be affected, although earlier we heard figures of 100,000. So it all depends where it is, and also how you do the valuations. Is it going to start immediately? People are suddenly going to withdraw their houses from Rightmove or whatever because they don't want the value to be shown, or is there going to be some independent view of what it is? I mean, lots of people would like to know what their houses are valued at, but they will scream when they realize that actually perhaps they're in the high band, all sorts of things like that. So basically, therefore, if you are trying to put those estimates across and explain how this would work, it's much more complicated than would have been the case if you were just doing a straightforward income tax increase or national insurance contributions increase. And even if you're looking at dividends, or you're looking, let's say, capital gains tax, which might change, a lot of push for it to be equalized or at least come closer to income tax. How is that going to motivate people in terms of doing anything in investing? So that may also change, and the whatever forecast you're making. So huge guesswork in there. So it just makes it slightly harder. But in the past, until the very, very end, we would still be giving recommendations to the government. And then we would be called in. So I'd go to the Treasury and be told what the budget was going to have on the day.
Right.
So of course, the speech would start at 12:30, because we had made all sorts of suggestions as a business department, which is where I was Director General. And we'd go there and be told what it would be. Most of the time, they had completely ignored our suggestions, of course. And unfortunately, the Department for Trade and Business right now has also lost, from the outside, it looks like it has lost a little bit of its voice in government. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had what happened last year in terms of the increase in national insurance contributions for businesses. And then we were locked in. We'd go in, we were told what it was all about, going to be about, and then, but you've got to stay here until she speaks. He. It wasn't a she then, of course. It was always a he. And I had to get special permission to get back to my office, just in case you leaked anything. Now, of course, everything's been pre-leaked. The only question is, has somebody seriously calculated the implications of all those figures that we're going to see in the budget tomorrow, and have they calculated them correctly? And now, of course, we all know and agree that all these leaks have been slightly counterproductive. So
But sometimes they're testing the water, aren't they, to a certain extent when they have these leaks to see, well, how popular it might be. We talked about anger beforehand being an energy and having some sort of influence, in particular people like the motorists, looking at that sort of side and the farmers. How much notice do people get then? What's the usual sort of period when it's released to people like you and the opposition parties?
well, as I said, in the morning, normally.
How early in
Um,
the morning? I mean, the mornings start for you and I because we do Times Radio early breakfast. It starts ridiculously
yeah,
early.
it would something like 10 o'clock, if I remember
10
correctly,
o'clock.
because of
Okay.
course the speech starts at 12:30.
Right.
So you go through all that. By the time you do that, then it's sort of 11:30 or something like that. And then you're saying, okay, cups of coffee, you can stay here now and watch it. As I said, I was managed to disappear. But of course you don't leak. You don't go out and tell anyone. But I mean, the cabinet colleagues who some of them would also find out at the last minute. And that's why she had the talk yesterday with the MPs to try to tell them there may be things in there you don't like, but stick with me.
Yes. Well, it says
So
maybe there's definitely things that people are not going to like when they look at them individually. But she says, as we always say, let's look at the whole. And I always encourage that because you've got to work out if we're going to raise money, we need to spend money, we need to work out where that's going to come from. So you do need to look at the whole, don't you?
yeah, you sound just like her. Apparently, she said you should look at this as a package.
There you
Not
go. There
n
you go.
so so go. Have you been Have you been doing the communication suggestion for
Well,
her?
I think that I've always said that you've got to look because the electorate are not stupid. They do know that in order to pay for services, you've got to get the money from somewhere. So it's just logical. And I think if people explain that, and I don't mind about U-turns, but this is why I think these promises are difficult because circumstances do change. And even Nigel Farage was getting into trouble because he's turned around and said, well, hang about, it doesn't make any sense anymore, this particular promise. It's not so bad if they make these U-turns, is it?
Well, I don't know. Actually, if you're expecting something or some stability, which was supposed to be what this new government was bringing, and people were relishing that or the idea of that, and you plan on that basis, whether it is a company intending to invest, expand, whatever, or hire, or whether it's an individual putting money aside for their pensions, or there is somebody who is planning their inheritance, um, how it will be distributed, or looking at a business ahead. Like this is why we had we got this protest from uh, farming entities,
Yeah.
which really were hit with this inheritance tax change that took place last year, or at least announced. It's not taking place yet. Um, then it just completely disrupts what you were doing, and that is quite negative. So yes, you can do U-turns, but if things that you have put in place, believing that this is what was going to be the case in the future, because you were told it was going to be like this, suddenly change, in other words, there's a U-turn, if you like, that is pretty destabilizing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And
And I think there's a difference when I say a U-turn. I think it's people shouldn't make the promise in the first place. When you say we will not raise taxes on ordinary working
yeah,
folk, if you don't make that promise, then people don't plan accordingly. Circumstances change.
it's true. And there is no doubt that we've had tariffs, but actually just soon after the Labour government came to power, we did have the Trump election. So it is absolutely true that things became a lot more difficult afterwards for loads of sectors. And also for all these countries with which we trade, even in Europe, where we don't do as much as we did before, but though we do still quite a lot in services, it is really important for us to have a, a region that does well, because then they want more of our things, possibly, and we can cooperate better and all that sort of stuff if they're doing well. Otherwise, they all sort of become a little bit more inward looking. And what we've seen recently, of course, I mean, we just got the data for Germany for the third quarter, no growth at all. It's only 0.3% up year on year. We are at least 1.3% up year on year. And the forecast for this year is pretty dire anyway. I think growth of possibly 0.2% for Germany overall. And Germany not doing well affects everyone else. Yes, of course, we had some southern European countries do better because of tourism and also a lot of money that has been transferred to them since COVID, more or less. And also, of course, the whole defense spending, which is supposed to materialize, including in Germany, which might be moving things up. But in reality, so far, growth in Europe has been pretty marginal. Overall, I think the forecasts are for the year as a whole to be about 1.4%, but it includes quite a lot of countries like Poland and others that are doing well, Spain doing well, Greece doing well, which is where I come from originally. But places like Italy really not managing an awful lot. I think the figures for Italy, if I've scribbled this correctly, is just 0.4% growth this year, which isn't very much. And, yes, improving next year, but we have obviously been affected by a slowdown in growth worldwide because of the tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the global growth is limping as per the World Bank the estimates and so on and so forth. We've got all sort of rhetoric about tariffs and so on and so forth. How exposed is the UK, which is already obviously Brexit battered, as you will remind us constantly? How exposed are we for a transatlantic trade war?
We seem to have got a reasonable arrangement in terms of the overall level of tariffs, but remember, we only, just like everybody else, more or less, were subjected to tariffs of something like 2% on average. Now we're subjected to tariffs of 10% on average, and there are still loads of areas where there is uncertainty, whether it's on cars, whether it's on pharmaceuticals, and those are seriously important areas for us, where there are still negotiations. And Europe is facing a bigger challenge because for them it's an average of 15, but they're also negotiating all these areas too. And our problem is that Europe is imposing extra tariffs now on some of, or intending to, on some of our products, which of course until now were exempt because the tariff agreement we got was as part of the if you like, departing agreement that we signed, the trade and cooperation agreement with the EU, excluded tariffs on goods, but it looks like they intend to put certainly some tariffs on steel, which is going to be quite an important issue for us. So we are exposed quite significantly to what's going on elsewhere. It's arguable that perhaps we should all have done it together in terms of resisting some of these tariff increases. It's true that Trump has lowered tariffs quite significantly from the original figures, including, for example, Switzerland, which was supposed to be hit very substantially, is now, I think, been coming down a bit, and other places in Southeast Asia and so on, where again rates have come down from the original very high figures that he had announced that day in April of this year, which were horrendous. Remember that thing he held in the whatever Rose Garden, which was, well, certainly frightened everybody quite significantly. Even with China, there's been an easing of some of the tensions in the short term, but lots of countries have reciprocated as well, and that's affecting everyone in terms of trade. Then you have the secondary trade tariffs, which are more linked to sanctions against Russia in particular. So lots of countries are affected indirectly by those. So the whole trade environment, therefore, world trade environment, is much worse than was the case. So, for example, for this year, the original forecast by the World Trade Organization, if I remember correctly, was for growth of about 2.7% in trade, maybe just under 3. They then revised it to minus 0.9%, if I recall. And now they've moved it up to plus 0.8%. So huge difference. This is sort of trillions worth of trade, the difference that it makes if you reduce that growth so considerably. And the only reason why they've upped it is because loads and loads of countries took advantage of the fact that tariffs didn't actually happen until mid-year, and they exported huge amounts of goods to the US. And one of the reasons why, so there was a lot of growth investment in manufacturing and in exports that happened from other parts of the world to the US in the first half of the year, which actually meant a lot of trade in order to avoid those tariffs. And one of the reasons why inflation has not really picked up as much as people expect in the US, because there's so much stock there, which has accumulated as a result of this, which needs to be sold and will be sold probably cheaply, and maybe lots of firms will lose some money on these transactions. Um, but it's because of that, because the first half was good in terms of export and trade, that there has been this revision in growth, and also revision a little bit in the growth of the world economy as well, which was much more pessimistic when the IMF did forecasts back in the spring of last year, and now they've all upped them a little bit for this year.
Yeah. Now, the IMF sentiment, it remains sort of oddly positive, doesn't it, despite the surging global uncertainty you speak about. But China's export woes and the Middle East tensions, it could spike energy prices, what, 20 to 30%. Given the UK's growth upgrade for 2025, where do you see the biggest vulnerability? Is it in manufacturing or services? And how might the budget green subsidies act as a buffer?
Yes, well, green subsidies, of course, go to individual um, firms that invest in renewables. This is one way of doing it, and of course, the people who pay are the consumers. So that's one of the problems that we have in the UK. Now, the question is about prices, first of all, that you mentioned. So I mean, that one would look at the wholesale price of gas as an indicator, or oil prices. Well, they haven't really increased particularly despite all the issues, and despite secondary tariffs, and despite the fact that um, exports of oil and gas from Russia are now more restricted than was the case before because of the secondary tariffs. We've seen India reducing its demand for Russian energy, etc., etc., already as a result of President Trump's, renewed efforts to do something on Russia, even though obviously what's going on right now between Russia and Ukraine, the negotiations suggest that maybe he's backtracked a little bit about this, but hopefully there'll be a way forward. But what's happened to the energy sector is that other parts of the world have produced more. So Saudi Arabia and others, the OPEC countries, excluding, of course, in this particular case, Russia, have stepped in to a considerable extent, or at least they are now keep announcing increases in output that they're going to have. And that has certainly stabilized the markets. So from that point of view, we don't have a serious issue. And if you look at the latest here in the UK, in any case, increasing the energy price cap that has been announced to happen from January, it's just 0.2%, which means, just a few pounds extra per household. The increase has nothing to do with wholesale prices, which have been low. It has to do with all the other things that you mentioned, subsidies for green production. And those are the areas where perhaps there could be a rethink about the way in which it's done. Again, there was a suggestion that could take all these things off, all these standing charges and all these subsidies, and put them onto taxation. But given all the issues we've just been discussing today, that's a bit difficult to do. But there is no doubt that this government is going ahead with trying to encourage more renewable production, more spending on nuclear. There's been quite a lot of commitment, and also raising the amount of price guarantees they want to give to those investors in offshore wind. So auctions have gone badly before because price offered was too low. Now they're offering quite big increases. Now, who's going to pay for this at the end of the day?
Yes.
We've got to think about that again. If it's not the consumer, it will be the taxpayer more generally. How do you upgrade the grid? Big money needs to go into that. One easy suggestion is scrap the rest of HS2 and redirect it all into green, if that's really what you want to achieve.
There you go. That'll please Ed Miliband, no doubt. Yes. The Bank of England November report, it flags a quarter three softness from budget jitters, basically, with base rates potentially stuck at 4.5% into 2026. If the global fragmentation, this is what Deloitte's is saying, forces coordinated easing, do you expect Reeves' fiscal expansion to clash with Bailey's caution, risking sterling volatility or imported inflation?
It could do a lot of that, but I think the most likely scenario is that we're going to have a cut in interest rates in December here to below 4%. And of course, in the US, we've already seen some moves in that direction. In Europe, we probably reached the lowest point at 2%. It's probably not going to be cut. Interest rates won't be cut, considerably more than that. We've also got a rethink of quantitative tightening. In the US, it's stopping. They're now talking about possibly starting quantitative easing again. In the UK, we may get more announcements. For the moment, they have reduced the amount of quantitative tightening they do, so that should bring less pressure on yields, and they should actually, in my view, do an awful lot more. So I think there is a general move to lower interest rates because there is concern about growth. And you were right earlier to point to the global environment being an important one that has affected in many ways what Rachel Reeves's options are. And I think that's one of the things to look at, that there is concern about employment, there is concern about growth. We're not over the problems yet. And monetary policy may actually play a role in ensuring that growth doesn't drop off as fast as would otherwise be the case. But that's what they would do. It's not that they will be able to get growth zooming again, I'm afraid. So it is, in some ways, damage limitation because of everything else that's been going on around us.
Yeah, damage limitation. That's absolutely right. We talk about, or you talk about, a new era of volatility from AI revaluations and
Mm.
geopolitical shifts. As you know, I'm determined to put the AI into Britain. We'll advocate it where possible. Looking to 2027 with global forecasts ticking up modestly to 4.5% ex-China, what black swan event like a Eurozone recession could derail UK's fragile 1.2 to 1.5% trajectory? And how should the budget future-proof against it?
But on the first bit, it could be the AI boom coming to an end. That's the thing that everyone is worried about right now. But you also see some extraordinary things happening. So one of the stories today is how NVIDIA has invested in Revolut, and suddenly this fintech company, which is about to become a bank, is now valued at 75 billion by comparison to just 45 billion in August. But that's bigger than some of the banks like Barclays in terms of its value at present. But at least there's something there in terms of what you're doing in terms of lots of customers selling financial services and so on. A lot of what's been happening on the AI front is one company investing into another, a little bit like perhaps in this particular case, at least it's not into another AI company, even though AI will play a very important part in what Revolut does in the future, one guesses. But what you have as a concern is that there's so much investment that needs to be made in AI, and that everyone is buying into each other and then getting agreements for them to buy from them as a result of that. Their components. So you invest in a firm which is going to buy your products, etc., which is what's been going on. What will happen if even one bit of that pyramid uh, sort of collapses, or something, or valuations perhaps seem to be overblown? Is it going to bring everyone else down? So that's the concern. Of course, that then affects the financial sector more generally, and we've seen shocks happen before. Yes, the financial authorities can step in, but what we found when there's been a shock, since you asked about what the budget implications would be, is that you step in and it costs a lot, and the government borrows more, or the central banks and the other authorities step in and rescue organizations, or step in to replace them. So that then leads to a rethink about investment. That means low growth as a result. So those are the things that could be an issue. And of course, you can just throw your fiscal rules out of the window as a result. This happened during COVID.
Yeah, and it is interesting as well. I mean, Elon Musk has been saying, as you know, his father's another regular on the show, and Elon's been saying that in a few 10 to 15 years time, everything's going to change. You're not going to need to work. Everybody's going to be
Yeah.
incredibly wealthy as a result of AI and robots roaming all over the place. Do you share that vision, or are you horrified by it?
Well, someone's going to have to keep all the people who are not working somehow surviving. and being able to have enough money to spend on the various things that we're supposed to be enjoying when we're not working. The question is, how is that going to happen? Is it going to be a benevolent government sort of giving you a universal basic income, or a universal even capital income is what people are talking about now, so that you can just use it and invest and do all sorts of things in your spare time, become an active retail investor, or even, start your own AI firm if that's what it's going to be. So it is a future which which makes a certain amount of sense that indeed a lot of jobs are going to go, but fills you really with worries. Yes, people say we've been there before. What is happening right now, and this is really what we've got to be aware of, is that AI is used by lots of small firms to just get rid of people if necessary, and therefore cut costs because they have all these extra costs. Here in the UK in particular, minimum wage going up and so on is becoming quite an expensive business for many. And also, of course, the national insurance contributions increase. So just to get back to parochial levels, which are very UK centered, but there are similar things elsewhere. It is the big firms which are the ones that are using AI to expand. Now, they don't necessarily use loads of people. So when you talk about data centers, which are going to come and be here in the UK, not only do they use huge amount of energy, which we've got a bit of a problem with since we don't have enough of the grid. Yes, you're going to have nuclear powers, possibly nuclear powered mini stations, possibly. But will you use them just for the data centers, or will you use them for something else? And anyway, they don't employ very many people. And also you have a lot of concentration of power in the ones that can invest, innovate, and grow. And that's also a problem because very big firms will have economies of scale and they won't use very many people. But I do remember seeing a report in the US about 10 years ago about where the jobs of the future would be. And even though AI wasn't prominent, the general belief was that, of course, manufacturing will, in many ways, modernize, become more robotic oriented or whatever. It's not going to employ many people. And we know that is the case. So manufacturing doesn't employ as many people as services. That's why it's more productive. But where the growth would be in just looking after the old. So it will be social care and health. Those are the jobs.
Yeah. And
That are going to be.
companionship and so on and so forth. And I think that's the great thing about robotics and the seismic advances there are in medicine and introducing all sorts of efficiencies. Do you think Rachel Reeves used a bit of AI to help her with her budget?
Depends on what you mean. But in terms of putting it all together, that's interesting. But if you're trying to see what do people think about this particular suggestion, you can just get it on AI very quickly. So I could do this now and just immediately say, no, that isn't going down well. Well, that is going down well. Or if you do that, you're going to blah, blah, blah. You're going to lose particular bits of the Northeast or wherever it is that you want to fight your next election. So it helps from that point of view. But the question is, can you use AI productively also in the public sector in order to reduce some of those costs and improve efficiency? And so far, unfortunately, yes, there are huge improvements in healthcare in various areas. But if you look at the standard measures of productivity and in the public sector, they seem to have gone down. It could be a question of measurement. We've said quite a lot in this book, about measurement. And I'm
Yes.
sorry, it's such a heavy volume. Obviously, it just completely rattled
Half a
my
rainforest, I can
computer.
see. It looks
Well,
amazing.
actually, it's not. Actually, it's not. It's not very many pages. It's very easy to read.
Right.
But we do talk about measurement, that you can't really measure productivity in a situation where there are no prices. Well, there are some prices for medicine, of course, and you can compare a little bit what the amount of time spent by consultant to what this consultant could be is earning in the private sector as well, while they're doing that too. But generally, you don't have the price that people are prepared to pay generally. Yes, for the richer, they can pay for private health. And in terms of calculating the outcomes, it's quite hard as well, because that we just spoke about the improvement in medicines and so on, which of course can detect and cure cancer more easily or whatever it could be at the end. Of course, you then have many, many more older people that you're going to have to keep on pensions, or if they can't work, on unemployment benefits or housing support or whatever. So the balance again is one you've got to think about. Yes, AI can do amazing things, Um, Whether it necessarily leaves you at the end of the day with less of a need of raising taxes is still a big question.
It's going to be an interesting discussion. We keep going, and we were talking about the population decline, the birth rate decline in particular. That's very worrying around the world. But the idea of longevity and these longevity clinics, where people are now predicting you might be able to live to 120. The real question is how you finance all of that, and if you do replace it all by AI and robots, what people do in their leisure time, because people get very bored and they're going to need things to do, aren't they? You mentioned your book. I absolutely would recommend it highly. Tell us about it and how people can get hold of it.
Well, it's as we said, it's called Mismanaged Decline, and its undertitle is What Politicians Won't Tell You About the Economy. So it basically exposes what's going on, what has been going on, and looks at the evidence of what's worked and hasn't worked. And a lot of what we just discussed, the importance to always think of the unintended consequences. And of course, how you price externalities. We have a little bit here also inevitably about climate change, because my co-worker, co-author, Andrew Ross, was at the Treasury at the time when we all worked with Nick Stern when the first climate change review came out. And as an economist, looking at externalities matters hugely, but as an economist as well, looking at market failures, where is it therefore, if those externalities are not properly priced, that you need to intervene with the carbon price, for example, or making motorists pay a little bit more for the pollution they do, and not just on the climate change front, but more generally. And that is as an explanation of government interference, something that needs to be explained a little bit more. But quite a lot of people are saying, well, who cares about market failures? We want to intervene for ideological reasons, and we want to do this, that, and the other, privatize because of whatever beliefs we have that the private sector can do it better than the public sector, when there isn't necessarily proof. And there you see what's happening with water, rail. Should I go on?
Brilliant. So hold it up so everybody can see it, and then get hold of it in all good bookshops. I'm sure it's there on
Yeah,
Amazon
it's on
as well. So, but for now, Vicky Pryce, you're going to be joining us again after the budget to unpack exactly what is said. But for now, Vicky Pryce, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, and thank you for the plug for the book. It can also be obtained from Bikeback, the publishers.
Excellent.
I'm Vicky Pryce. I'll be back after the budget on the Andrew Eborn show to talk about the implications of what Rachel Reeves is going to announce.